Now that we have a fully textured, fully modeled spider looking thing, it's time to rig it up and prepare it for animation. This is going to be a very rigid kind of rig, so there's not going to be a lot of deformation going on. The bones are going to mostly work on entire meshes as a whole, so the meshes individually aren't going to get too deformed. That's not particularly like a common thing, so if you want a video more about like general like humanoid rigging, I've got a video on that as well, which might be more useful. But beyond the fact that we're not going to be using weight painting and we're going to be directly selecting the vertices that match each bone, there's a lot of rigging related stuff that's going to go on in this video that's still going to be useful either way. So let's get started, shall we? We're going to get started by adding a armature and just a single bone. We'll set that to appear at 0, 0, 0. And I actually now noticed that our origin for our spider is nowhere near where it should be. So we'll set the origin in the center of mass. That seems like a better one. So if we set that to 0, 0, and 0 now, we'll go into the armature here, and we can't see it right now. So if we come down here to the object data properties in the viewport display, we can set it to in front, so we always see the bone. Now let's go into edit mode and turn this 90 degrees around, go to top view, and we're gonna line this up with the main body. This is gonna be our main bone. So this is more or less the root bone, right? Then for the back part of the body, we're going to just extrude out another bone. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to select it and Alt P and disconnect, and let's scale that down a little bit. And then I'm going to select this first and then the original bone second, and Control P to parent with keep offset. And now if we were to go into pose mode, when I move this bone, the other one moves with it, but this still maintains its individual movement. I know that for most of my animations, if not all of my animations, this bone isn't going to be moving. If I wanted to be able to move the upper body and the lower body here separate from each other, I would probably add in a root bone here that everything is then connected from. And then we'll extrude out a bone here. We will disconnect the bone. Disconnecting still has the parent-child relationship, as you can see through the line, but there's just a offset, the same thing we created between these two bones. And these are going to control the fangs. So put part of the bone there. It doesn't have to be super exact. For rigging purposes, it's going to be nice to have these being in like opposite angles. So this one pointing in this direction, that one pointing in this direction. Because then when we start rotating these, I can just apply the same rotation to this one, but negative. And they will always move together. Now, coming off our root bone again, I'm going to extrude out a bone, just roughly. And we're going to disconnect the bone and move it over to the first leg over here. Make sure it roughly matches. Then this bit is going to come up to the first joint. And usually if you're like rigging legs or stuff like that, you would definitely want this to have more than just one bone. You'd probably have 3 bones, so you have a little bit of bendiness to it. But these legs are just absolutely massive as it is. And again, these bits are going to remain rigid. So from there, we extrude out another bone and move it down into the joint. And from there, you guessed it, we extrude out another bone and we move that down into the feet position. And that is the bone structure for each one of the legs. So we can just copy this entire structure over, Shift D to copy. And the heights should all match up because we didn't change those. So just matching up this should pretty much line up as well. And if you name all of these bones properly, there is a symmetrize function in Blender, but I don't like using it because it's a little iffy sometimes. So what we'll do instead, I will set our cursor back to being at 0, 0, at least more or less, in the X direction. Then if I select all of these bones, and I duplicate them with Shift D, and I just scale them in the X, with the scaling being done around the 3D cursor, you can see that's a quick way to mirror everything. And that's all of the bones being placed already. So that's fantastic. Now you're going to want to give all of these names, because otherwise, if we go back into the bones here, they're going to be called bone 16, 17, 18, and so on and so forth. And that's going to be confusing. So we're going to name this, and I'm going to name this in direction based on the top view. That's what makes most sense to me. So this will be our Fang R. We'll also have a Fang L, upper body, lower body, and then these legs, we're going to number them 1, 2, 3, 4 from back to front. So this is leg 1, segment 1 on the right side. And then the same on the other side with the L. This is mostly important for things like setting up the inverse kinematics, but also for setting up the weights that we're going to be doing here in a second. Telling the bones which vertices are connected to them. Knowing which bones are what, instead of just having them be numbers, is hugely beneficial in understanding what the hell you're even doing. Alright, with all of the bones named and set up, I don't need anything else that needs to move. So we can go back into object mode here. And we can select the spider first. Then select the bones. Control P. And we can say deform armature. We can make empty groups, envelope groups, or automatic weights. For most of your characters, you're going to want to use automatic weights because that's pretty much good enough, and you can touch up the weight painting manually a little bit. And this will automatically assign weights to your mesh based on where the bones are. So I can just show you what that looks like, but we will not be actually doing that for this object. So now if I go into pose mode here and I move this around, you can see things move, but not quite in the way I would like them to. We can see, and I can actually turn off the armature real quick, that its automatic weight painting includes part of the body and this specific eye, while what it should include is only this ring, not even the chain selected to it, because that's part of the body. This ring should rotate, then the leg segment itself, this ring as well, and then maybe this link, but I think this link actually belongs to the next leg segment. Yeah, because the last leg segment would only have this link and the leg. So it should only have the two circles and the leg in between as pure red, and everything else should be pure blue. So how do you do that, you might ask? Well, if we just made empty weights, we could skip a step here, but I'm just going to show you if you did automatic weights, it's not that difficult to fix. You go into edit mode, and let's go back into here. And what we do is we just select everything and remove it from this vertex group. Then we simply select everything that we want. So that's these three pieces of geometry. And then we simply just assign that to this vertex group. Now, if we go back into our weight paint mode, we'll be able to see everything is blue, except this is pure red. So everything is set to 0. This segment is now purely set to 1. Turning on our armature again, if we now go back into pose mode and we rotate this leg, we can see it rotates exactly in the way we would want it to. And you'll note that I already had this in mind while modeling, right? So everything that needs to move is its own separate mesh. So it's easy for me to just select the linked mesh and apply it to a certain vertex group now. So for instance, I've got the leg over here, and that's just these vertices. And then finally, of course, we do the fang for the left, the fang for the right, the lower body, which is this part, and then the upper body, which also includes the eyes. Finally, when all that is done, oh, of course, the upper body also includes these first chains, because those are going to be stuck to the body. And then we just tab back into weight paint mode to double check if there's nothing that went wrong, because everybody makes mistakes sometimes. That seems about right. That seems right. And that means we now have our proper weight. So going back to the armature now, everything should work marvelously well. Going into pose mode, and we can move everything just as we want to. These ones we can move not too much because they clip through. That's a bit of an issue. And that's because it's a good thing that we really see this now. We probably should be rotating this from a point inside, because now if we rotate this, we'll be able to see it rotates from this point, right? So we get away with a little bit more, but not a huge range of motion. And now we need to try to match this up somehow, which is actually quite important. It's going to be minimal movement in those, but there will be movement, so they need to at least function somewhat well. Now, everything has bones and weights, and now we're going to get into the actual rigging part. So it's time for some IK, because we don't want to move all the legs in every animation. Like, okay, we're going to, in pose mode, move this, and then this, and then this, because that is tedious and painful and tends to just not even look as good, right? Of course, it heavily depends on the kind of animation you're making, but for what we're doing here, we are definitely going to want to have inverse kinematics. So the way we do that is we go back into edit mode here, and we add in an extra bone on the ends of all of our legs. And we should actually be able to extrude multiple at once. These are going to be our IK controlling bones, so make sure to select them, go into the bone properties and disable deform. This way we can actually export the rig without including these bones, which is amazing. Selecting multiple at a time does not work, so you need to actually do them one at a time. I thought it didn't, but I just wanted to double check for you guys. Then another thing we need to do, and for this we can actually select multiple, because they're still parented to the bones that they're extruded from, and that we don't want. So Alt P to clear parents. And now if we move this bone, you can see this one doesn't move with it. We'll also take these joints here, and these are going to be the elbows. So we make sure you don't actually select the entire bone, just the joints at the end here, and just extrude upwards. And we're going to do the same thing here. We want to select them all, and first and foremost clear parents, and then we need to select them all again and disable their deform. And it's at this point that you realize that maybe setting up the IK for one leg before copying everything over is a good idea. And to that I say, yes, it would be. But I kind of forgot to do that, as I usually do. I very often forget to do that. Do as I say, not as I do. You do want to put them up a little higher though. These are the bones that the joints are going to be pointing towards. In theory, that shouldn't be necessary, because I'm going to set them up in such a way that they can only rotate in one way anyway. So we might not actually end up using these, but I've made them now, and I'm going to show you how to set them up, and then I'm probably going to remove them. So what we do is we select one of these bones, make sure that we're in pose mode, and then we have this bone constraint properties option. We can add our inverse kinematics here, and we can set our targets and our pull target both to the armature, and then we need to select a specific bone. So we'll look at this bone. This is called leg 1 segment 3R 001. Preferably you would call him IK controller or something like that. At the moment, I'm too damn lazy to do that. So I'll just look for lag 1 segment 3, 001. That's going to be our target. Our chain length will be 3 because we've got 3 bones that we're working with here. So that's 1, 2, and 3. You can see the yellow line going from this bone to the base of this one. So that's correct. And the same thing we can do here. This is lag 1, segment 1 for the right, and it's 002. So we'll go back here for the pull target. We'll put in R.002, lag 1, segment 1, so that's that bone. You'll see that the entire leg gets rotated, so we'll set the pole angle to 90 degrees or minus 90 degrees to make sure it points upwards. And now when we move this controller bone, we'll see that the entire leg moves around, and it'll always be trying to point towards this bone. That's how you usually set up IK. I'm going to do away with the pull target for now, and you'll see that we can still move the leg around, but it's just not influenced by this bone whatsoever. Then in our bone properties here, we can actually, on a per bone basis, influence a few things, like the stiffness of the rotation. So that's how much the other bones will need to rotate before this one starts to rotate. That way, oftentimes you don't want the hands of a character to rotate as much as parts of the arm, so you can set the hands to being stiffer. We can also limit the rotation for certain axes, and if we just set the limit for X and Y, or Y and Z rather, to 0, that should now mean that this thing can only ever rotate itself in the X direction. Which for the mechanical thing that we are doing is actually great, because now we can literally just move this up and down. We can move it away if we wanted to. Like, the IK itself still works fantastically. It's just limiting how it can physically rotate. But if we're going to set these to being limited to 0, we can just come up here instead and lock those axes from moving altogether. Just wanted to show you the limit function, because something like an elbow shouldn't be able to bend backwards, right? So you can limit its rotation. But if you just don't want it to rotate at all, just lock those axes, and that's effectively the same thing. And that is the reason that I said that I don't really want to use these IK pulls, because there's not going to be a lot of rotation going on anyway, other than around its own turning axis. So we don't really need these. Now I have all of the bones that I want the constraints on selected, with the one that has the constraint already on it selected last. So I can just copy constraints to selected bones. Now everything will be put on those constraints, but they all have the the wrong targets. So we'll see, this is leg 1 segment 3. So that makes sense. This is leg 2, segment 3. So what we'll do instead is we'll change this to the controller for leg 2. And then it matches up to the location where it should be. And we'll just do that for all of them. I'm going to extrude out a new bone here, going into edit mode. Disconnect this bone as well. And what this will do is it will control the rotation for the 2 fangs here. So now what we want is when we rotate this one up and down, these ones should rotate in the Z. So what we will do for that is we'll add a transformation constraint. Set the target to being this bone, which is called upper body 001. So we'll get our upper body 001, and then we'll map from and map to. This can stay the same, and then in the rotation we'll change our source Z axis to be taken from the X. And we set the max here to 360, and we should probably set the minimum to minus 360 just to be sure. And we copy the same things down to here. And we can see that now creates a rotation where if we rotate this in the X, this rotates appropriately in the Z, but it's a little inverted, right? And You can do a lot there, but I think just rotating this 180 degrees on the X and just moving it out a little bit is probably the easiest way to deal with that. So now we've got that linked up, and we can just do the same thing we did before, and that's copy the constraints. Now they move both in the same direction, so we'll take this one and we'll change this from negative 360 to positive, and the bottom one from positive to negative. And now they've got the inverted movement. So I can control both of those fangs with a single rotation of this control bone. I've been messing around with trying to like copy location constraints and stuff like that to make it easier to animate in the next part, but nothing is really working out that well. There's a lot of weirdness going on. So I'm just going to manually animate both sides of the body, which is not ideal, but it'll do. It's not worth me spending like 2 or 3 hours troubleshooting rigging stuff, while the animation process would only save like half an hour if I did that. So I'm just gonna leave it for here right now, and that means a little bit more work next time, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm like 10 hours into this character. I'll take an extra hour of work to just move on.